I think where we got to is we've got the 3 speakers who will come and speak at the item, which is the next one, and Lydia wished to speak separately, so I just need to make sure we've got everyone round the right way. So if I have got it the right way, we'll welcome Lydia.
Madam Chair, we were actually wanting to speak at the local board after Manarewa, and we're going to speak with a full-time whakapōtō. We can
It's
speak
fine.
at the item of that.
I thought it looked a little bit the wrong way around, that's why I checked. So shall we go, shall we just move to the item and then work out the right order? So Manarewa and then Otara Papatoetoe and, okay, got it. So let's move then to, so local board input, as you've heard, we're going to do it all at the item. Extraordinary business, there is none. Notices of motion, there aren't any. So we'll move straight to item 9 and invite Angela, who's the chair of Manarewa, to speak to the item.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, councillors, Your Worship, members of the IMSB. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to this item today, and I would like to also acknowledge my colleagues from the South who are here to do the same thing. What I thought I might do is to start at where I was going to finish, which is my recommendation to you from the Manarewa Local Board. And then I just wanted to speak to a couple of things in the report and just finish with a reference to the policy. The view of my board is that a wider discussion around pools is really timely, but to enable the local boards to respond to it, it should take place as part of the long-term plan discussions as our budgets are now finalised for this coming financial year. So in that context, I'd recommend the status quo option on your report, option 1, with a deferral to a region-wide shared governance discussion through the LTP. Just in terms of the report before you, I'd like it to be noted the sample size of the Gravitas survey. It's quite small. Over the 336 people surveyed, there was only a 20% response rate for street intercept interviews, a 26% response rate for the computer-generated phone calls, and it seems to me to be quite a small sample size on which you can draw a conclusion. That could be why I find option 3 a little bit odd, particularly when the comment that goes with it is that it specifically targets the impact of pricing policy. The Learn to Swim program is of enormous value, there's no doubt about that, but it is not the impetus for increasing participation numbers for children and for adults in our pools in Manarewa. And the barrier, according to our pool staff and our community, is the adult charge for supervising children, and also the lack of awareness it is that children under 16 are still free. That's something that we continue to be challenged with every year, is getting the message out that it is free for children to swim. But why we charge $1 for supervising adults has always astounded me. It continues to baffle me why we would have that charge in place. And if there was any investment, if you were considering any investment in this coming financial year, perhaps it might be to remove that charge for Manarewa, because the numbers that I have is $9,000 per annum, and that might give us a clue as to if that actually is the barrier. Outside of that, if the users don't pay, who does pay? And I think you consider options around that, and I just wanted to address those specifically for my board. There were good reasons for why my board didn't introduce a targeted rate like our colleagues did in the South. Only 7% of our residents use the pools, and it would have been inequitable, and it didn't find any favour in our informal and our formal discussions with our communities. And secondly, and importantly, it was very clear to us that the way that the budgetary constraints were heading, we were going to be facing introducing local or targeted rate within the next few years. And here we are now in the governance framework review, and we'll be through the long-term plan discussing the introduction of local and targeted rates. So to put that on top of an already pool targeted rate was not going to be very fair for our communities. The local discretionary funds, so why don't we pay it out of our LDI? 3 reasons. For us, it sets a bit of a precedent that would arguably extend to the local board funding hall and community centre hire that previously wasn't in place for users. So we have users that serve our community well. They weren't being charged to use the hall. They're running residents and ratepayers groups. Now we charge them. and they're coming to the board asking for us to pay for those charges. And so it will just go on as the policies change. Secondly, the board doesn't have any certainty over the next drain on our LDI due to the savings within the organisation. So every restructure that's taking place is impacting on our budget. I guess lastly, we'll run out of money. So it comes down to savings, like everything does. So strategically, from my view, the principle of the lean techniques achieved within Manukau Leisure, applying the same model to the balance of the organisation and the CCOs, will realise millions of dollars of savings. Immediately, perhaps reviewing the allocation of funding to third parties who deliver in the area of pool participation and carry overheads themselves to cover before passing that funding on to the swimming pools that are delivering the lessons. Maybe we should be funding those directly. Just in terms of the policy, the 2013 policy, so the goal of the policy was to enable all young people to access our aquatic facilities, to promote a sense of belonging, provide equity of access, help raise the level of children's swimming abilities. And one of the objectives of that policy was to increase the number of children 16 and under utilising council-owned aquatic facilities. And the benefits of the policy, one of the benefits of the policy was removing price as a barrier to swimming for young people 16 and under, contribute to cohesive, resilient communities through encouraging use of aquatic facilities, health and well-being, and also contributing to maximising the use of our facilities. And I think that's important to keep in mind, particularly if there are going to be any discussions in the future heading towards charging for 16 and under. And although it's not part of today's discussion, I'd like to draw a line in the sand and say that that idea would fly completely in the face of our policy, which is to enable those facilities to children to go swimming. Both the 2016 impact assessment report that was done for council and the 2017 Gravitas report that you have today confirm for you that there has been a significant impact at both of our pools. One of our pools is only open a few months a year. It was costing us to charge, so we removed the charges. So we do in fact have a free pool in Manarewa, albeit only 4 months of the year. If we looked at current numbers, just talking around the, potentially charging for under 16s, the numbers that I have show that this will generate a revenue of approximately $84,000. And that would halve immediately as soon as you introduce a charge. So the income benefit for charging for young people is outweighed by the negative social and health impacts. I guess I'll wrap up. If you look at the pre-policy number of attendance numbers at our pools, which are different to the numbers you have, and that's just another thing that, we need to make sure that the numbers that we're looking at are all the same and accurate. Pool participation for our Manarewa pool was 347,352. As soon as that pool policy, the pricing policy was introduced, that number dropped to 196,322. And so our pools dropped 70%, and that was adults and children. So this isn't just adults not coming, the adults aren't coming and they're not bringing the children as well. What we've seen, and it shows in your report, but I've seen our numbers as well, and the numbers are sitting around the mid-200,000s now, and maybe that's the number. Maybe that's the number that we have, and that's another discussion that we need to have if we're still asking our people to try and achieve the pre-pricing policy number. That's just not achievable, and that changes the dynamic of the discussion that we have. We know that our pool participants don't travel from Papakura to Manurewa anymore for a free swim, they're staying in Papakura. And we know some of our residents are travelling over to our neighbours to have a free swim. But we also know that the supervising charge at our charge is a stretch. So the answer is in there somewhere, but it needs to be that holistic discussion that forms part of the long-term plan, and that would be my board's recommendation to you today, that we have a good look at it, we do it properly, and we do it at a time when we're all forming our budgets. At the moment, our budgets are finalised for this coming financial year, and we wouldn't be able to come to the table with anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Just to probably aid the process a little bit, some of the discussion that's been happening organisationally and around the table is that there there's a reasonable degree of comfort with status quo. Let's be honest, if any change was to be made, it would only be made during the LTP process. So I know that we can have a really long discussion on this, or we can actually move reasonably quickly to agree that the status quo remains at this time. This is useful background information, but this is not the time to have the big debate about pool charges. So I know that we've got 3 other local boards wishing to speak and comment on this.
Thank you.
I'm just putting this out there to say, welcome to hear from you, but if we're all heading in the same direction, we could probably use the time a little bit more wisely.
Agree.
So,
Good to know. Thank you.
questions, Sir John?
Madam Chairman, I'd like to move that we keep status quo.
Okay, I hear you. Let me just check protocol-wise. We do have 3 boards who are wishing to speak, so let's signal you wishing to move. I suspect that Councillor Newman would
Happy
wish
to
to second. And can I just, our 3 other board representatives, would you like to come forward as well, and we can just, perhaps at this stage, if you want to just add to the conversation rather than long conversations. So warm welcome to Chair Sosene, who is going to be the next speaker off the ranks.
Look, first can I say thank you, Chair and Governing Board members, for allowing this quick opportunity, and we will add to the kōrero that's happening. Just really want to make quick intros. We have our local board members, Carol Elliott, Deputy Chair Walter Tongiamoa, Nick Bakulich, but also Otara Papatoetoe representative, Mary Gosh from Otara Papatoetoe. And
Mary.
as a Manukau ward, we really, it's about our response to this report. And Chair, we just would like the opportunity to make a few comments
Sure.
in our response, and we'll be really quick but add to the kōrero. So, as a board, highly surprised in terms of the information that was presented, and it was brought to my attention yesterday because I'd been away. But Chair, inequitable impacts of the region-wide swimming pool pricing policy, and understand there's been quite a bit of work in terms of where it all started in 2013, understand that there were key objectives, and also understand what officers had brought forward. So we as a board, our views were not included in this report. Can I say that the officers did come to our board in February, but we were not asked these questions. And so we, as you are aware, first of 2 boards to introduce targeted rate for entry. We're not going to send our tamariki rangatahi to the pools without adult supervision. And as you can appreciate, major political call in area of high deprivation. A number of you will know the stats. And so our recommendation is that the report is inequitable. Our last slide is that we support option 2 in principle, and again, as you've heard the earlier board, wanting to have a really wide discussion as to where this should sit in terms of the collation of the report. And so we put forward agree in principle. However, we do not believe that option 3 in subsidising swimming programs is a feasible option, because we actually haven't had that conversation. And that's our presentation, Madam Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. And I just want to check, Mary, did you have anything to add from
Yes, Madam Chair. I've got an email here from our chair. So firstly, if I could put her apology for Lotu Foley, our chairperson. I'd like to read what she's put through. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it today. Our local board was not consulted on the options in this report, and our views on these options are not included in it. The reason our board sought a targeted rate to fund entry for all to local pools is to address the inequitable access issues that the region-wide policy on pool charges for adults has created for areas of high deprivation, such as our local board area. We believe the report recommendation is inequitable. If we had been asked, our local board would have had more support for option 2, removing pool entry charges for adults accompanying children aged 16 years of age and under across Howick, Manurewa, Mangere o Tahuhu and Otara Papatoetoe local boards. We do not think option 3, subsidising swimming programs in Howick and Manurewa, is a solution to resolving inequity. It just creates more inequity for Otara Papatoetoe residents. I apologise that I'm unable to attend in person, as I have another meeting in Manukau. So, and from myself, Madam Chair, I just would like to add, our board, we try our best to, in all our decision making, be transparent and accountable, and what this recommendation is doing is creating that imbalance, and so we would urge that we don't want to go down this road, because I mean the governing body should be setting the example, and so that it should be the same for all. So thank you very much for hearing me.
Thank you. That's clearly understood. So thank you. Well, oh, yes, Carol.
I just want to add one other little thing. These proposals seem to go against the whole philosophy of the absolute revolution we have had in setting up the super city. We were forced in this way because we realised we had inequity in our boards, of trying to have continual, as all of Manukau City did, free admission to pools. So we had to go through the arduous process of going out and consulting, and the two boards did widely, and we were told, yes, that they would go for that. It was $13 per household per year when we had one pool. It is now $31 per household per year for our ward now, because we have two. We have Toya, which is so successful that in the summer they have to have sessions. They have 2 sessions a day. It is so popular. And also the other thing we did when we first initiated this, Counties Manukau District Health Board wrote to our board congratulating us for our green prescription for the nanas and the papas who could come and do their green prescription exercises and do their exercise at the pool without having to worry about finding the money for it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Appreciate that. I think we'll move on to the actual item now. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you, Kat and team. I think let's keep the presentation to a bit of a minimum. I think we, the bottom line is I think we've got a lot of work to do going into the LTP, just listening to our local boards and the feedback around regional inequities. I think that's where we need to pick these up. So I'll hand over to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. What I wanted to do was just walk you through the background to this piece of policy advice. So back in April 13, the governing body adopted the region-wide swimming pool pricing policy, which was very much targeted at young people, providing free access for children 16 years of age and under. And it didn't address any other user or service charges. Then we did a impact assessment in March of 2016, went to the Finance and Performance Committee. The results of that impact assessment were that the policy created and delivered on one of its objectives, which was equity of access for children. The pricing policy led to an 18-month increase in visits. However, that wasn't sustained in the long term. Participation rates dropped back to their usual baseline trends prior to the policy. So we had a peak in participation that then dropped off. The policy also resulted in an inequitable impact on Māori and Chinese users. We saw that participation rates amongst those two population groups declined across the network, and it was more pronounced in particular areas. We saw decreased visits to two particular pools in the south, which were Manurewa and Lloyd Ellesmere. We also saw that visits remained constant in the areas that introduced targeted rates. So on that basis, we were requested to provide options to increase participation rates. There was no discussion about any changes to the regional pricing policy. It was all about addressing participation rates as a result of the impact of the policy. So here we are today to discuss some options in terms of how we might address those participation rates. In order to provide advice to the committee, we undertook some research just to get a better sense in terms of how the data had changed since that impact assessment. We found that there was a steady increase in participation rates across the network. So if we go back to the impact assessment, we saw a decline after 18 months. After that, it has started to progressively increase again across the network. So at a network level, at a general participation rate, we're starting to see good numbers across the network. And now we're actually starting to see problems across the network in terms of capacity. So the pools during peak hours and also peak times, as in summer school holidays in particular, are at or over capacity, and that's resulting in overcrowding. It's resulting in some changes in terms of programming, and that potentially has a negative impact in terms of maintenance costs of pools and all of those sorts of things. We have also seen that the participation rates at those two pools in the south that I identified earlier, where there was a drop in participation, Manurewa and Lloyd Ellesmere, their participation rates have significantly improved from where they were. Where the baseline trend was going down, there is improvement across those two pools. It is now tracking upwards. Not on the same trajectory as the other pools, but it is improving. Then we did some targeted research into 4 local board areas to talk to the people that to find out what the barriers were and the drivers were to participation into those pools. Community told us, and it was reasonably consistent across the people across all 4 local board areas, that lack of time was a significant problem for them. Overcrowding was a significant problem for them. Price was an issue in only one of those local board areas. However, price was a driver when it came to actually increasing their participation. So it wasn't a barrier, but it was an issue that they looked at when they were deciding whether they should go to the pool more often. They also suggested improved facilities would influence their decision-making to swim more, and lessons in particular would increase their visits to pools. So now we have some quite specific information that helps us assess some options around the pools. So the options that we have on the table are basically the status quo. And the reason for that would be that the problem in terms of general participation rates has largely corrected itself. We now have a problem with pools potentially being at overcapacity at peak times. This option has no budget implications. However, let's be clear that it doesn't address the inequitable impact of the regional pricing policy. And that impact was on Māori and Chinese people and young people. So in terms of how we assess this option, it delivers a small and steady increase in participation, doesn't address inequity. We then go to option 2, which was to remove entry charges for adults accompanying children in Howick, Manurewa, Mangere Otahuhu, Otara Papatoetoe local board areas. This particular option removes price, which was a barrier to participation in those local board areas. So we remember back in the Manukau City Council days, the policy was that there was free access for adults and children. And when we introduced the regional policy, that had an impact on both adult and children participation rates. So we can see that the policy isn't necessarily delivering on that access issue for young people. This is a very broad option. So it doesn't target the Māori and Chinese people in particular, but it will deliver a response to that because it delivers for the whole populace within those catchments of those pools. So it has a windfall gain for adults that are currently prepared to pay to take their children to the pool. There's a potential risk around this option in terms of pools being over capacity at the moment. They may not be able to cope with increased visits. So when we look back at the impact of that regional pricing policy when it was introduced in 2013, we saw an 18-month spike in participation rates. It's logical to assume that we're going to get the same spike in participation rates, which is going to potentially put pools that are at capacity certainly over capacity. Because it's a broad approach, there are significant costs associated with it. So these are estimated to be $1.2 million per annum. So the recommendation around this is that the committee makes an in-principle decision on this option and notes that it requires funding to be allocated during the long-term planning process. And within that process, that's where you'll look at other policy decisions that have been made into the LTP, and you'll consider the trade-offs between those policy positions and when you come to allocating funding. So we believe this option delivers increased participation in South Auckland where price was known to be a barrier. We then have a very targeted option, which is to subsidise swimming lessons in Howick and Manurewa. And so this is targeted at Māori and Chinese people at those two particular pools. So it addresses the inequitable impact of the regional pricing policy, and it addresses the specific impact on those pools within the network. The added benefit of this option is that it addresses a second component of the regional swimming pool pricing policy, which was around improving swimming skills and competencies of young people. By delivering lessons, we will deliver on that objective. It addresses the barriers to participation. It addresses issues around pools being at capacity because they will be run at off-peak times. It has a cost estimated to be $150,000 per annum. This would also be an in-principle decision. It would require funding to be allocated during the long-term planning process. And again, you'll go through the exercise of assessing trade-offs against other policy options. The issue around this particular option is that it creates an additional set of inequity. It could be conceived to be unfair. Because we are targeting a particular population groups in response to the regional policy, we now create another set of inequity. This option, we believe, will deliver on the objective of increasing participation by Māori and Chinese young people, and it will increase and improve their swimming abilities.
Okay, so let's just go to where we had got to with Sir John moving status quo. If you have a look at the recommendations on page 8, if people are of a mind to basically pick this up in a more finessed way during the LTP process, we can simply move that the status quo will remain in the short term as there's no budgetary allocation, and then C, to agree that changes to this policy require additional resources and etc. will be considered during the LTP. It feels that unless there's a strong move to start to give direction to this, that might be the best place to have that discussion. Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I second that. If so, the wording, as I understand it, for A and B will just be collapsed into that the committee endorse the status quo option. Is that correct? Yep. Okay. Yeah. I think a lot has been said here this morning. I just think that, frankly, we need to step back from this set of recommendations. I have some sympathy for what was expressed by Lydia Soseni, but I don't think that this is a place, I don't think this is a report to delve into the mechanics of how we address any perceived inequity here. So I'm very comfortable, and hopefully we can just progress this on the basis of the status quo and have a conversation through the long-term plan debate, and hopefully the Mayor will be able to provide some oversight in this so that we can progress it in that manner. But I don't think this is an item that I want to see debated this morning at length, resulting in option 2 or option 3.
And the suggestion from Dean is that we add in a recommendation where we do go back to our local boards and flesh out this conversation. The wider issue is that the regional implications, and to be honest, I know for Councillor Cooper and myself from the west with some equally deprived communities, we need to look at regional equity, because to be absolutely blunt, this issue is wider than just South Auckland, and I think that needs to be picked up in the LTP. So that's been moved and seconded. So speaking to the recommendation, Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be supporting the recommendation. I think, and I'll put away the speech that I had eloquently written last night on this matter. But the one issue I think that has, where I think Councillor Newman is correct in saying that he's showing sympathy for what Le Maunga has said from Māngere o Tahu. The issue goes back, and I'm glad that we're adding consultation again, or going back to the local boards. That's what's driven their concern. And I think it needs to be said that if there's communication breakdown between officers, between the way in which the local board has the ability to communicate their concerns or feel like they've got input, we've got to correct those. Now, I know that the motion is going to deal to that, but I think that has what has driven the fact that they've come with a PowerPoint presentation. I think even Chair Dalton put it really eloquently today and touched on parts of the research that she felt were inadequate. So I just think let's get the conversation happening better with local boards. I've come from a local board background. If we can do that, then we're operating in the shared governance space. I just think we've got to be careful in how we bring these things to committee, and some parts of our council decision-making body are feeling left out, and I think that needs to be said. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Now we've got Councillor Fletcher, and then the Mayor, then Councillor Philip Heiner, then Councillor Cooper.
Don't worry.
Councillors, remember
Too much.
we
It's
are
okay.
heading for status
I
quo.
won't.
I will just say,
Save
and
it
I'll
for the LTP.
apologise in advance for being a tough chair today. Everyone gets grumpy when we go through till 4. Everyone criticises the chair when we go through till 4 or 5. You are here for the day, those of you who are staying. I will endeavour to make it quicker, but it's in our hands. Councillor Fletcher.
Madam Chair, I don't want to prolong the debate because I'm one of those that is leaving early. All I would ask is, in supporting the status quo for the purposes of moving forward today, is that communities of interest as well as local boards can be areas that our officers will give special consideration to. I know that you also have an interest in Special Olympics. There are a wide range of our community that need consideration when we come to the LTP and we are looking at this more fully. So I just send a signal to our officers that we have got a very complex situation here, and if we are going to address it fully, then it is not just geographical communities, it is communities of interest, particularly those with disability, that need to have special attention.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Good point. Councillor... hang on. No, sorry, not Councillor Goff. Mayor Goff.
Be a councillor if you like, Madam Chair. Look, very briefly, I support the status quo. I think the problem with option 2 and 3 is that each creates more inequities than it solves. And if we had any worry, it would be around 2 areas. One, we might worry that some kids might not get to swimming pools because the adults can't afford the dollar sum, but I don't know that that's been demonstrated. And secondly, in relation to swimming lessons, I just think we've got to be a bit more inventive in how we do it than choose 2 board areas arbitrarily and say that's where we'd subsidise swimming lessons. You might start with drowning fatalities and work out which communities have the greatest number of fatalities. And that may be Pacifica, actually, rather than Maori or Chinese. We would need to know that. I don't think that creating free entry for adults in an area that's probably a decile 9 socio-economic area addresses the inequity of areas that are decile 1. So of all of the options, the status quo is the best, And if we want to target the areas of where cost may be an obstacle or lack of ability to learn to swim may be contributing to fatalities, then we need better targeted methods than those that are proposed in option 2 and 3.
Okay, thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Cooper.
It's okay, I won't take up any time. We'll save it for the LTP. Okay, I just want to comment that we just haven't really addressed, if you look at this survey, overcrowded cleanliness for every single one, and that's where we haven't hit the sweet spot on the under 16 free either, because we can't keep building the pools bigger. We have to somehow look at this. We know we can't even afford pools in areas with none, let alone making the ones we've already got bigger, and so that's my concern around maintaining and then more operational costs. It's quite scary. So I'm looking forward to the conversation about all the policies and the targeted rates in the LTP. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And finally, Deputy Chair Filipaina.
Thank you, Chair. And very, very briefly, just want to acknowledge the local boards in the Manukau ward around the targeted rate. Firstly, because as Member Elliott said, it was more around the mamas and papas that now have access to it than our young, our rangatahi, because of the amount of aerobics that we had there. So I just want to acknowledge both our local boards in regards to that targeted rate. Also, Chair, and again very briefly, the KPMG report that came out in 2011, when this discussion around free swimming pools that we had as those members around here, around at the amalgamation, that report identified monies, and just to our staff, I think it's important when we do head into that conversation as per B, that KPMG report that's there at least adds to the conversation that we will have. That was in 2011. And Chair, just on the point that Councillor Fletcher made around disabilities, I know that when we discussed this particular item in October of 2012, one of my concerns, and they were relayed to me by ex-councillor of Manukau City Council, Colleen Brown, who has a son with disabilities, but her concern was around caregivers with people that had a carer with disabilities, and the fact that they had to pay as well. So I look forward to the open discussion that will take place during the long-term plan, and again, I definitely support that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Filipaina. And last word to Councillor Clove.
Nothing
Finance
to say,
Chair.
just in C. I can't see why we're putting them particularly in South Auckland. Why can that not be?
Yeah.
Why can that not be removed?
I didn't want to raise that, as I might be accused, being from the west, of being difficult, but I think it's a fair point. Thank you. I think we've reached a sensible landing point. I do, however, want to acknowledge the staff and the work that was done. You did what we asked you to do. We just now realise that perhaps we were a little bit premature in that asking, but it's very useful leading into the LTP. Kataraina?
Sorry, through the Chair, can I just get a question of clarification, because we don't have any work on the work programme for C.
Yeah.
We had work on the work programme, it went to Finance and Performance Committee, and we were instructed to be quite specific about looking at the south.
Sure.
This piece of work finishes that direction by the Finance and Performance Committee. Is C saying you would like us to yet again start another work programme more broadly, as we don't have, we haven't got anything else to refer to other local boards apart from this specific piece of work to the south?
Okay. I think this starts a very good discussion, and it certainly points at what the policy does, and when you turn the policy dials, how it impacts. I think please correct me if I'm wrong, but to me the most logical starting point for this is for us in the LTP to decide if we want to change, move and reset the dial on this policy, then we will go and talk to the boards. My understanding of C is, and we perhaps, I think it's a good point to pick it up, that we pick up this consultation as part of the LTP process. We're not asking you to do that now. Are we all, that's what we thought we would do? Good.
So
then let's just clarify in that. Okay, I'm going, so if we just add through the LTP as part of the LTP process. I'm going to put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you for that
Oh, if you-
clarification, Kat.
Though you can't refer that bit because you might have a different something to put through.